I'm a big believer in humanity in the long term. I think we're going to figure a lot of things out. And there's just been a collective elevation of our consciousness and of our frequency, of our expectations of government institutions and all the big pharma, big media, big whatever. We expect more. And I think people are organizing in ways on those platforms that are holding them accountable. So it's encouraging to see.
Welcome to the perfect society where Republicans and Democrats both get their way, and so does everybody else. Visit everybodyshappy.com for more information. I'm Curt Derby. Thank you for joining me today. Today is part of our Brainspace series where we hope to fill up your mind and maybe even save your life. I have with me today Kaleb Valdez. Kaleb, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. You have led an atypical life. To say the least. And I'd love to get your story and then start from the beginning. So you grew up off-grid. What does off-grid mean?
I was thinking that it was more just not a part of mainstream media, of typical, rat race culture here in the U.S. I was actually raised a lot of my life in Mexico, in northern Mexico, about 3 hours south of the border. But you go there, even today, it's kind of like going back in time, at least a couple decades, and some of those places, even a century, just because it's so remote, off-grid. We didn't have TV growing up, didn't have a cell phone until I was in college, so pretty atypical, I guess, in that regard, as you said.
Definitely. And you said you milked cows by hand.
That's right, we did.
Okay. Did you live on a farm, or was it just...
We did. It was kind of a hobby farm. My parents wanted us to learn the value of hard work, and so my dad we had milk cows growing up, had to be milked every morning, every night. And when it was freezing cold or it was your birthday or whatever, you got up and milked cows. We had chickens, a couple pigs. Those were horrendous. They're such a mess. Ducks, geese, lots of cats, barn cats and dogs and things. So yeah, little hobby farm. We probably had just about broke even. We weren't subsistence farmers necessarily, but it was a great way to learn the value of hard work, some of the hard lessons of life and death that you learn on a farm, and kind of gave me a lot of respect and affinity for the greatest generations of Americans that, really had to work, bootstrap, kind of your good old boy hometown America feel in a lot of ways there. So.
Well, I said that we're probably going to go chronological, but I think I just lied.
That's okay.
We'll try to go back to chronological.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that you say that because with all due respect to people living today, myself included, we think we have hard times. And you mentioned a couple generations ago, they really had hard times. And then you go back to the late 1800s and oh my gosh.
Right.
They had to hunt and kill their own food. They had to build their own homes. They had to deal with the weather and disease that they didn't know how to cure yet.
Right.
I mean, I think we're living in the best time in history.
We are. And it's interesting because there is kind of a resurgence, a return to that. There's people that do the cold plunges and the marathons and there's a whole industry built off people who want to return to a world that challenges our ability to adapt and our desire to have, something physical. I mean, we live at 70 degrees, morning, evening, winter, summer. You walk outside and you're in an air conditioned car. And so your body really isn't challenged to adapt even to the climate or the circumstance very often.
And I'd like to get to some of those things, hopefully,
Sure.
The cold plunges and getting back to nature and all that, because that's I'm at a point in my life where I'm pretty interested in stuff like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned no mainstream media. Mm-hmm. Does that mean no TV?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have television. We got it a bit for the Olympics. Didn't have a game system or, Nintendo wasn't a part of our growing up years. And it kind of shows with my hand-eye coordination. I think a lot of my peers developed some pathway that I missed in there. We had encyclopedias. I did have a little computer that had like a early 90s version of encyclopedias I can't even remember the brand of encyclopedia, but it led to a lot of time just enjoying books and reading and playing with your siblings, playing outside. It was idyllic in that circumstance.
That's fantastic. How many siblings do you have?
I'm the oldest of 5 kids. So
did y'all get along growing up?
For the most part.
Yeah.
I mean,
as much as
you do.
I had an older brother who tortured me.
Okay.
So,
and I'm sure I'd have to admit, being the oldest, there was definitely those times where you got to teach them a lesson.
Yeah. Did you? Right. Because they need to do what you tell them.
Exactly.
So you read growing up, you read as a child.
Yeah. My mom teaches literature still to this day, and she's just always been passionate about reading. So that was kind of ingrained in our family culture was, the love of good books, of good literature. We kind of later in my high school years, we got into some movie watching as a family, but it was very few and far between the types of shows that we would sit down and watch if we, had the VHS version of it.
Now, when did that happen? Then? When did you get the TV and the VHS?
I mean, we had it growing up, but it wasn't a part of what we did really. So I remember my grandma used to record Mr. Rogers, and she'd send us a tape every once in a while, and we'd watch that until it fell apart and got all scratched up, and then she'd send another one. So
why is that show not in syndication?
Right?
I'm serious. That is one of the best kids shows ever.
Isn't it though?
It really is.
I mean, it's very much in theme with the perfect society.
I know. I need to bring it back.
Live with a little trolley in our hometowns. So
I know. That and the Electric Company.
Yeah.
Sesame Street's still on. They're making new episodes of that. Mr. Rogers is, of course, passed.
Yeah.
And Electric Company's done, but those were great shows.
They were amazing.
All right. And you walked to school.
Yeah, well, I lived right across the street from
campus,
so that was kind of a no-brainer. Didn't have to walk uphill in snow both ways,
Both ways.
But
10 miles.
Yeah, cross the road, hop the fence. All of my friends lived within walking distance in this little, we call it a colony. It's just a little community down there in Mexico. And so, in a lot of ways, growing up there was a lot like, I hear my grandparents talking about walking down the block and being at their friend's house and things like that. I don't know how kids these days, I feel like they just kind of, it's all technology fed. We had to make our own fun. So we'd build bonfires. We'd go out in the desert. In high school, we'd just pop open the truck and put on some country music, and we'd swing dance out in the parking lot or out in the middle of nowhere. So kind of an older generation of America that just kind of forgotten how to do that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I have a 16-year-old son, and my now ex-wife and I agreed. We really kept him away from the cell phone stuff.
Wow.
In fact, I don't think he had a cell phone of his own. He might have been 13 or 14. And that was her idea. And I was still against it. I was like, he doesn't need one. I didn't have one till I was 37.
Right.
He doesn't need one. But she made the point, and this is what sold me, is, when we were kids, we had the corded telephone, or at least I did. I don't know if you did on the farm. You had a phone.
It was cordless by then.
Okay, cordless. Okay.
Still plugged in the wall.
And so we were able to call our friends if the phone line was available. Mm-hmm. But he can't do that because he doesn't have his own phone. I'm like, okay, good sell.
Okay.
So he's got a phone, but we control the Instagram. He gets 30 minutes of Instagram a day.
Okay.
And it might be 30 minutes of social media, period. I think Instagram's the only thing he's on.
Okay.
He has a Facebook account that we made, but I don't think he's ever on it.
Yeah.
But, when he turns 18 and he can make his own decisions, I'm curious to see.
Yeah.
So we tried to keep him in that older generation frame of mind.
Yeah. And I mean, full disclosure, I don't have a teenage son. I don't have any kids, but if I had to choose, I think right now that would be a big discussion my wife and I would have to have going into that is let's limit our kids' exposure. I think it's important to control their online presence. And so get them a Facebook page, get them a brand or a handle or, however you think you need to do that, just so nobody else does. And then it has some longevity. And then when they turn 18, you can turn the keys over to that, and let them do what they will. But I think you need to equip them to handle face-to-face interactions in the real world and communicate verbally because so many kids are interacting with a screen far and above and way before they actually engage with human beings. And it shows. I mean, you go to your typical coffee shop, those baristas just, may or may not have those social skills of interacting with customer service experiences. So
yeah, and you're right. And at the same time, you need to spend time in your own head. Yeah, I think. I mean, I think, you're relaxed, you're in a chill state, it's just you and your thoughts, or at least that worked for me.
Yeah.
And I still do that. I'm very self-aware of my emotions and my goals and who I think I am and what I'm good at, what I'm not good at.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, you can't do that when you're distracted all the time.
You can't. And I see it
with anything, let alone cell phone.
Well, exactly. And in my generation, I have a lot of friends who you can just tell, and we talk about it all the time, and I have to watch it myself. You get addicted to checking that Instagram. You get that dopamine hit every time you get a notification. You're addicted to social media, and you definitely can be. And you get in this consumer mentality of, I'm just intaking a lot of this content. And so other people are doing my thinking and feeling for me. If you're comfortable being alone with your thoughts, thinking big things, I mean, that's the first thing, is to disengage somewhat from what everybody else is telling you, figure out what your message is, and then start creating content for other people to consume. And that's how you influence society. That's how you shape the world, is being okay with each of us has our own individual course and thought process on all of that stuff. And so when we share that on the social network, I think that's a good use of that, is creating content and putting that out there for other, people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I think at this point in history, I think humanity, or at least humanity who has cell phones, because not everybody has a cell phone.
Right.
Not all groups and countries have cell phones.
Yeah.
I think. But I think we're in a transition stage, because it's still the shiny toy, is the cell phone and the social media, and even the internet to a degree. I mean, the internet's been around about 30 years.
Right.
But the social media is what, 15?
Yeah.
2008, 2009. I think it got big. I got on Facebook on 2011, 2012, I think. It was my first.
I think I joined in 2008 or 9-ish.
Okay, so you were a couple of years sooner.
But I'm older than Google, and that's, that hasn't been around that long.
Same.
So.
Well, and I think, here's my theory, that, and I have no evidence for this, it's really an opinion. One of those things that I spend time in my head that I come up with.
Yeah.
I think we as a species is getting used to this thing, and we don't know what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
That's why we're so addicted to it. And I think there's some people, and I'll probably put you in that category because I'm getting there, that I'm aware of the doom scrolling, that I know, and sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you just need a break.
Right.
Doom scrolling doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden an hour goes by and I could have been reading my book that I was reading, or I could have been working on a new episode. So it's my belief that we're now shifting. There's some people that are still going to be addicted to that stuff. And then there's other people that are kind of going back to the old ways.
Yeah.
Because they realize the value in that. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. I mean, over the next 3, 5, 10 years, we'll see.
And I'm open to the idea that maybe human beings weren't intended, our neurology wasn't developed to be as informed as we are right now. I mean, if anything bad happens anywhere, you immediately know about it in your pocket. It used to be you'd find out about things through conventional means or a network of other humans. And now we have technology and an algorithm, this almighty faceless thing that's deciding what content we need to consume when. And a lot of it, I'll be honest, is designed to amp up our reactivity, our stress. It plays with our emotions. And so you can choose to disengage from that, just step away and live your own best life. And I think there's a lot of people who are seeing the value in that.
You're right, even though it's still hard to choose to get away from it.
It is.
But when you're aware of a problem, that's kind of the first step toward changing things.
Yeah, and I think if anybody's watching this show or engaging with these types of conversations, they're already aware that, that they're kind of a commodity, they're a product, and their attention span is being monetized by those systems to keep them engaged.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And we were talking about mainstream versus new media.
Yeah.
Which is the podcast, the internet, the emails, the social media. Mm-hmm. As much as this is a shiny new toy and we still don't know what to do with it and we're still affected by it, I think it's an amazing vehicle.
Huge opportunities.
Because and I know we're going to talk about this later when we talk about your profession, but there's been these institutions for decades. The mainstream media, politicians, structure of government in general, universities, even Hollywood to a degree. There's these, and major medical, there's these big institutions that currently run things, but with social media exposing some of their deficiencies, I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that and I know you're going to come up with some discussion with medicine that I'm looking forward to hearing. But I think it's a great time in our lives where we can question these big institutions and come up with better alternatives.
Yeah. We've kind of put the collective consciousness online and in very powerful platforms. I mean, you look at everything that's happening from Doge to just Twitter or X and all that stuff. It's really encouraging because I think I'm a big believer in humanity in the long term. I think we're going to figure a lot of things out, and there's just been a collective elevation of our consciousness and of our frequency, of our expectations of government institutions and all the big pharma, big media, big whatever. We expect more. And I think people are organizing in ways on those platforms that are holding them accountable. So it's encouraging to see.
Yeah. And I love what you said that I forgot how you just phrased it. Or I'll rephrase it.
Yeah.
That the human spirit eventually wins out.
It does.
That the dopamine addictions, they got us for now.
Yeah.
But eventually it won't have us.
Right.
And that's what I mean by I think this is a transitional time in history because we're this stuff is so new that we're just reacting to it rather than having it be part of our lives.
Yeah.
As a tool that's helpful.
Right.
And I'm making broad strokes here. I'm not saying everybody is one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think eventually on an individual and on a collective level, humanity wins.
I agree. I believe that.
Humanity wins. You told me before we met that you have more in common with baby boomers. And it sounds like from your upbringing that's why, that you lived the way the baby boomers did.
Yeah.
Without
in
the
a lot
technology.
Of ways. Yeah, in a lot of ways. And I don't consider myself like a Luddite. I've had interactions with amazing people that are Mennonites, Hutterites, Amish, that are very, or just primitive societies that are still, working their way through the spectrum. It's interesting to see what happens when in the developing world, somebody gets a hold of a cell phone that instantly connects them with the entire rest of modern society. And I've seen very humble little huts that have a cell phone charger and a data plan, and it's like they're transported through every phase of societal development that our society had to fight through, and all these different, the Industrial Revolution and all of the different world wars and things like that, and technological advances that we did in the first world. There's so many people who are jumping to the front of the line now, and it's exciting to see them create content from a hut in Africa and share their lived experience with the rest of the modern age. So that's kind of interesting. And that, to a degree, that was my experience, I guess. My education in Mexico was bilingual. We didn't really watch, Narcos, Breaking Bad, Queen of the South, all these shows that kind of shape your perception of where we were living at the time. We knew that the cartels, were there, but unless you got involved in that world explicitly, it really didn't affect our life. And that kind of changed in 2009 and 10. A lot of political maneuvers happened in the U.S. and Mexican governments in terms of how we dealt with the border and the immigration issue. But the cartels themselves began a drug war in 2008 and 9 that in a lot of ways has continued to this day. They were vying for territory, and they would tell the Mexican government, if you stay out of this, we'll stay out of your business, but we're going to clean house. We're going to reshape the power structures here. And so during that time, it was a very dangerous time. And that's when my family, a lot of other families began their exodus. I went back and forth multiple times to my hometown during that time. And it was, I have a love-hate relationship with Mexico. We'll just say that. In 2012, after college, I did go back to Mexico for a brief time and wanted to start a home security system. This is when Vivint was really big up here. I watched ADT try to enter the market down there, and they went in and offered, Mexican securities companies, we'll just buy your lists from you and install our monitors, and we'll start, doing our thing here. And once those people found out, they generated lists of customers that really they didn't exist. And so ADT bought a bunch of fake accounts, fell on their faces because they weren't servicing their actual clients. And so we saw an opportunity to go down there and enter that market. And at a certain point, we had to have that discussion with private security, government security, police, and things like that, and the cartels to say, hey, whatever thing you guys have going on right here, we're not interested in interrupting or influencing all that. We're just providing a service and a product of, securing these homes. So we did that a lot in Guadalajara and parts of Mexico City that were very affluent and technologically advanced. They wanted smart home capabilities. They wanted security and stuff like that. And so that was my first foray into kind of that side of Mexico, if you will. And I love the country, the food, the culture, the history, all of that is very much, my family is Mexican descent. But that was my first experience with kind of cartel life and Mexico itself. And I ended up leaving in 2012. I moved up to Canada and worked for a little time up there. Just because I didn't see a whole future for me in Mexico at that time.
Is that when you kind of officially left? Like that was when you were gone? Because you said 08 and 09, you were going back and forth.
Yeah. I was going to school in southern Arizona. I was in college there. I was studying archaeology, foreign languages, and business. And so it was kind of a random hodgepodge, but northern Mexico has a lot of archaeological sites that I was very interested in and working with some of the archaeologists in southern Arizona. And then my business degree was what I was going into that field at that time. And then foreign languages, just because of the places that I was living. I've always been interested in language growing up, essentially bilingual. It was really easy for me to add Portuguese and French as two other emphasis. And then I had a free degree, essentially.
Yeah, and Portuguese is real similar to Spanish, right?
It is. Yeah, it was very easy to kind of morph into one or the other.
Okay.
So.
Well, great stuff. How'd the alarm company do?
It went really well. We were the 15th fastest growing company in Latin America in 2009 in the security industry. It's a great little business. My partner who started it with me, we ended up kind of getting out of that space. We moved it more into commercial security for a big church and several multinational organizations, and then we kind of exited that space. And I finished my degree in Middle Eastern Studies and started working overseas in the Middle East where all the work is. And I was in Washington, D.C. for a time. And that's where I loved my time in international business and foreign service and things like that. But my niece was born with a genetic condition that would require a lot of medical and holistic intervention. And I'd always been interested in the body and health and things like that. And that bug never really left. Once it bit me, in high school, I did a lot of things with medicine and it just never went away. So I was always interested in the body. And I thought, I can keep going in this international realm of business and people and things like that. I remember thinking, I wish doctors had more of a human side to them, because I didn't really associate with a lot of the surgeons and anesthesiologists that I knew. They were great people, but they did best when people were unconscious or didn't ask them questions back or anything like that. So I came back to the U.S. I went to Dallas, Texas. I had a buddy that had just enrolled in chiropractic school there. He told me that chiropractic was a thing. I think I'd been once or twice in my life. I was not raised in this chiropractic holistic mindset necessarily, but that was where I saw, okay, I can use my small business acumen, my interest in entrepreneurship and being creative and all that. I can relate to people, I can get to know them and their stories, but I can also take care of the body. And so that was kind of the impetus for pushing me towards chiropractic.
Well, I love that. And I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, your upbringing off grid, where you had to deal with people and you had to kind of be your own person, and you're not influenced by all these other things, probably was a great foundation for being a holistic healer or therapist, whatever term you want to use. But
yeah,
it seems like that'd be a great background for somebody who goes into those fields.
Yeah, if you want to step into that world, you have to be consciously aware that there's been a lot of programming and agendas that have been shaping how we're brought up. You're terrified of certain diseases and certain, buzzwords that I won't even put on the podcast because it'll get us banned. But there's certain medical interventions that are very popular and pushed today, and you have to be okay questioning the status quo. I know that chiropractors are always going to be the underdogs. Like, that's just the system that we're in. We're a very new profession. We're relatively new, I should say. We're 120 years old, which compared to Chinese acupuncture, we're newbies. The American Medical Association is more recent than that. And before them, homeopathy was kind of the status quo here in America. We had homeopathic ambulances, and every pharmacy would carry homeopathic remedies and things like that. And then Western medicine, what we think of when we talk about allopathic medicine or the American Medical Association, and I'm talking about medical doctors and doctors of osteopathy, essentially, DOs. That institution became very popular right around World War II, World War I, World War II. And it was because Congress allocated some funding from the GI Bill to send anybody who was coming home, from service. We can get them into medical schools. And American Medical Association approached the chiropractors and the osteopaths and said, "Hey, let's all do this together. We can join forces and take advantage of the GI funding to get a lot of doctors out there." And it was when chiropractors said, "No, we're going to keep our autonomy. We're going to do our own thing." Osteopaths said, "Yeah, we'll join you." And so MDs and DOs kind of took off in one direction there. DCs, chiropractors like myself, we went a different route, and we grew further and further apart. It was kind of like two cousins that were estranged from their little redheaded stepchild over here with chiropractic. And so unfortunately, that's led to what we call the schism today, where it's just this huge divide between the medical approach and the chiropractic approach. And with the thing that we were talking about earlier, how people are advancing, there's a lot of social media in the new media age. We're talking about things that work. And so you have a lot of crunchy moms on Facebook that are raving about chiropractic or whatever, or, cancer diagnoses and treatments and things like that people want to share. This is what's helping me. This is what's working well for me. We didn't have that before. The medical institutions, big pharma, big medicine, controlled big media and the legacy outlets. And so they could shape the messaging however they wanted. And they've used it to push prescriptions and intervention. Whereas the chiropractic philosophy inherently views the body as self-healing, self-regulating. And there's definitely a place for both. My niece, who I love to death, she's always going to have big pharma and medical intervention because of her genetic condition. I can't adjust a 15th chromosome into her body, but we can manage that with the miracle of modern medicine. I'm not anti-medicine, or I have great friends that are MDs and DOs, and I love the work that they do if their heart's in the right place. But that system is so prone to, and we've seen how it can be manipulated to control and to profit from people who are sick and hurting already.
Yeah, that's back to the institutions we were talking about.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating history. I didn't know that's how
Most
things
people don't.
came about, that it was World War I, World War II, and Congress was funding this side of things, and the prescriptions and the interventions. And
there's a lot more to it. I've tried to reduce it, and my recollection of what I know of, the little bit that I've studied that, but I always wondered why we got here. Why are so many doctors and chiropractors at each other's throats? And I will say, just to continue that thought, I started into that thought, but a lot of the new graduates from medical programs that are hardcore medicine are more open to chiropractic and to homeopathy and holistic healing, I guess, if you want to call it that. Chiropractic is not homeopathy. A lot of people kind of conflate the two. And homeopathic medicine is its own branch of a study. And it has a very interesting philosophy that I love working with. I cross-refer to a brilliant homeopath that's in Texas. And so I believe in their institution. There's a time and a place for medical intervention. There's definitely a time for surgery and medicine. I'm glad we have that. But if you can prevent it from going that far, that's where I want to catch people on the front end of this whole process and either educate them about preventative wellness and the health benefits of regular chiropractic adjustments, or get them back on that path without drugs or surgery wherever possible. Mm-hmm. So I moved up here about 3 years ago, and that's where I see the bulk of my patients now. And I am a huge believer that earlier is better with the chiropractic. And so that's why between my niece being diagnosed at birth with her condition and the benefits that I believe neurologically that chiropractic affords, I want to catch these things as early as I can in the process. And for me, that starts basically at conception. I'll take care of mom through pregnancy, through labor delivery, and then adjust babies as soon as they're out. And we can get them started with adapting chiropractically to life.
Well, that's great. And I'm glad we're up to present day. So
Yeah.
leaving your childhood behind. So you're a holistic practitioner and a doctor of chiropractic.
Yes.
Okay. And it's from what you said, it sounds like they're kind of one and the same, that they're just not medicine and surgery and prescriptions, that it's more the body heals itself.
Right. The holistic approach. And there's a lot of terms that we throw around nowadays, especially on social media, holistic and wellness and things like that. Holistic just means you're looking at the person as a whole. And so anybody and there's massage therapists, there's nutritionists, there's personal trainers, that all identify with the holistic approach of saying, okay, it's not just this one little thing that's a part of you. It's your whole life. Let's look at sleep. Let's look at diet, exercise, all the stuff that we know makes us healthy. And so being a doctor of chiropractic, the schooling for that is extremely rigorous. I wish somebody would have told me that before I went through my schooling. You do an undergrad degree just like anybody else, and then you take a CCAT entrance exam, basically like an MCAT. And then you spend 3.5, 4 years in an extremely intensive 30 semester hours per semester program that's very much on par with medical training and medical doctors. The only difference is I'm not learning how to prescribe medicine or do surgeries. I'm learning how to adjust, and we're looking at a lot more of the diagnostic, especially imaging. There's a few areas where chiropractors receive a lot more education than your typical medical professional. Diagnostic imaging, lab work, systems pathologies, things like that. And it allows me to talk to my medical colleagues very well and confidently in what I'm diagnosing. But I'm very much focused on the neuromusculoskeletal system of just how does the brain control all of this. And so that's my focus as a chiropractor.
Okay, great. And then I've had chiropractic adjustments before.
Awesome.
And fill in the blanks here.
Yeah.
So they adjust the body because the body's out of alignment, and that could be muscular, it could be bone oriented.
Joints. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're doing is you're kind of just realigning the body so that it fits together the way it's supposed to.
I love this line of discussion. Yes. And that is how we've messaged our profession for the last 120 years. A lot of doctors of chiropractic, that's about the level we can talk to people about is, oh, you're out of alignment. Let me pop this. And I think that's led to this idea that, and I definitely grew up with this, that, something in my back has gone out. My back is out. I threw out my back, and I'm just pushing that back into place. And that's the pop noise we hear. And then it's lined up and we're all good. That is the very surface level explanation of what we're doing. Right beneath that is this idea that I'm putting force and energy into joints in the body. And in the old system of doing things, the Newtonian model, we would put a chemical in the body. The chemical would break down into atoms. The atoms would change the state of the body in some way, reducing inflammation, changing something about whatever's going on chemically on the molecular level. And that would give us the outcome we wanted. That's the Newtonian model. Once we discovered the quantum model, where really all we're trying to do with drugs and surgery is change a state in how the energy in the body is working. And this kind of gets into Eastern medicine, chi and, life force, all that type of stuff. Chiropractors, we call it innate intelligence. And so if I can reconnect the body's own intelligence with itself, I can realign the body. What I'm most focused on is the nervous system. Everybody thinks chiropractors are back doctors or joint doctors. We are nervous system experts first and foremost. And so the only way I can access that nervous system, because it's encased in bone up here, is through the motion of the joints of the body, particularly the spine. But in our office, we do a full body adjustment. We do feet, knees, hips, wrists, elbows, shoulders, ribs, jaw, face bones, like you name it. When I align those structures in a different way, I change the way that they move through their range of motion. That actually changes the signals that the nervous system gets from where it is. So yes, I'm aligning things, but I'm more interested in waking up the nerves in that part of the body, because any adjustment I do on your body is going to end up in what's called the prefrontal cortex, in the motor cortex or the sensory cortex. And that's where your body processes emotions. That's where it makes executive decisions. The seat of what we know as neurologically, the personality, it's a bunch of structures in your brain called the default mode network. And this isn't chiropractic philosophy. This is actual neurophysiology. There's about 30 different structures that we've discovered so far that are talking to each other constantly. And they're telling you a story in your head about your body, about the world that you live in, about, the shade of lights that are hitting the wall here. Every little detail about your environment, your brain is taking that in, processing it. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so the brain, to conserve energy and be very efficient and be able to focus on what it wants to, that default mode network runs in the background, and it's just the same story that we tell ourselves over and over. And so with the adjustment, it goes beyond, for me, just aligning bodies, because when I make an adjustment, it triggers something called the salience network. And the salience network actually interrupts the default mode and says, hey, you've been telling yourself a story about your health, about your life, about your relationships, about whatever it is for so long. Check yourself. Like, just do a scan, figure out what's going on, what's actually happening in your knee. You've had this bum knee for 5 years. The knee is healed, but you're still telling yourself that it hurts. And so the brain then does a rescan, and it starts to tell itself a different story about your pain. And there's hundreds of white papers that have been published on this. Dr. Heidi Havik from New Zealand College of Chiropractic, one of the most prolific neurophysiologists, she's published hundreds of papers on this. And what we're finding is even the story of the memory of that pain, what our brain tells us about how that came to be, that changes with chiropractic. And so I can literally realign, yes, the body, but more importantly, the person's perception of reality and of their body and of their life, simply by connecting them with their selves. So
that's really interesting. I had no idea that was part of chiropractic.
Trust me, I'm learning every day. I
thought it was just the physical, but now you're talking about the emotional.
And the metaphysical, and you can imagine how that, when I entered chiropractic school, I just thought we pounded people down, lay them down, pound out the high spots, get it flat again. And it's a couple weekends of learning how to pop backs, Once I got into schooling and I discovered the neurological aspect of that, that was a huge game changer for me. And then I was like, well, if this neurology is here, why are we doing this on old people that, have been living with this problem for 40 years? And then I started getting younger and younger. My youngest patient's been maybe 12 minutes old, so there's very safe, gentle chiropractic techniques for babies. And I wanted to master that. And doing that, I positioned myself as a pediatric, neonatal chiropractor. And a lot of moms were coming to me and asking about, all of the other holistic stuff that goes with birth. In 2022, we had a national formula shortage in the country. And a lot of my patients are reaching out saying, I can't get this formula for my baby. Can I blend up liver and goat milk? Can I dilute this water? Like all the different things that moms were getting very creative with solving this problem to keep feeding their kids. And I started researching that, and that led to my book called Starving Babies that I mentioned to you. And I have a love-hate relationship with the title. I wanted it to be just riveting and gripping, and we don't want to have starving babies, of course. But my point was they're starving neurologically for the connection that we used to have in the greatest generation, the baby boomer generation. Breastfeeding was the norm. Like, at what point did we get away from that? And where did we start messaging moms and doctors and changing the way that our society births? And that's what the book is about, essentially, is there's an institution there that we really don't think about called Big Formula, and they stand to gain billions of dollars by convincing moms that they're no longer necessary for that baby to feed. And so that's what I wanted to kind of go into. How did we get to that point as a society?
No, I love that. And I'm glad you started getting into your books. I want to talk about it.
Okay.
Let me make a broad comment, and then I want to drill back down and talk about your book. Because all this time I spend in my mind, for better or worse, it seems like, and we touched on this earlier, that we're discovering more and more that we already have the answers, that it's built into our DNA. It's built into the natural order of things. And that in World War I and World War II, we strayed away from that into, let's say, modern Western medicine, I guess is what you could call it.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see, well, maybe and you're right, there's a place for that. But maybe that's not all of it. So maybe we go back 100 years to some of the other things that worked, just like going back to the greatest generation in the baby boomers where breastfeeding was the norm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And I've thought about this a lot with a lot of different things, not just breastfeeding, but are we being duped, or are we, and I guess there's no answer for this, but are we just looking for a shortcut? Because let's face it, I mean, formula is probably a little bit easier. It costs more.
Absolutely.
But, mom doesn't have to sit there with the baby. Mom can live her life and stick a bottle in the kid's mouth. And again, I don't know that there's answers to this observation, but like how did we let ourselves get off the path?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I don't know. I don't know that we can answer that. Again, maybe it's convenience. Here's a thought I have. Here's a theory. And I want to talk to you about religion too, because you mentioned to me that you're complex religiously. I want to find out what that means.
Yeah.
But now where was I going with that?
We're talking about just shortcuts and how we got to
where yes. Thank you. Yeah. Here's part of it, I think. I think human beings, by their very nature, are curious and creative. And I think that we try to find shortcuts. We try to find better methods. We try to find best practices. And so that's, in my opinion, yes, maybe it was government directed. Yes, maybe it was money hungry with big pharma. Mm-hmm. And I don't deny that. But maybe it was also, hey, here's the best way to do it. Let's do this. Mm-hmm. So then society kind of gets on board with that, because it sounds like a great idea and you can sell it through the media.
Right.
You mentioned it. But so I wonder if that's why, is that we're constantly in a state of change.
Yeah.
And one can say, well, it's not always for the better, or it's not often for the better. I don't know. That's debatable.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's why things change.
Yeah.
and we don't breastfeed anymore that we had been for tens of thousands of years.
Right.
But anyway, let me drill back down to your book. I didn't mean to.
No, this is a great setup, I think, for having this discussion. And I think you hit it right on the head when you said we're always looking for a shortcut. And some of these shortcuts are amazing, technologically and medically, and all the ways that we've advanced in infant care. We've reduced maternal and infant mortality dramatically, especially in the developing world. You might be surprised to hear this, but the U.S. is the only country that has not.
Really?
And we actually have increased the likelihood of maternal and infant mortality by a huge factor. And I need to look at current statistics on that, but I drill down into that in the book of why that is. Why is every other country in the world improving those metrics, and we are reversing it by a factor of 5 and 6 times in the number of moms that we're losing? And it's because what we're doing isn't working. Our efforts to find a shortcut are not being tempered with acceptances of the limits of what medicine is capable of, and being aware that there's always going to be a trade-off. And some of those trade-offs are no-brainers. If you need surgery and the alternative is death, you're going to get the surgery. Between 8 and 12%, the World Health Organization thinks 8 to 12% of births should be cesarean. In places, I've seen it as high as 80, 90% of births and deliveries. Now, that's medical intervention on a very natural process that mothers are terrified that their baby's too big, or they're going to rupture, or, all the things that they scare us about. And so it's important that we look at what we're trading for these shortcuts, and ask yourself if this is really, because that's not a discussion that enters into that, is, if I choose this route, what am I actually giving up here? And that's essential for informed consent in any medical procedure, is saying, hey, if you do this, here's the doors you're closing, and these are the things that you're giving up, and these are the risks that you're assuming. We're never talking about that. It's just saying it's a doctor enforcing his will and saying this is the way it has to be because I say so. And so I think we just have to educate on what things we're trading up. And that's what I was trying to do with Starving Babies, is just, here's all the interventions out there, and formula is a great thing. I have no issues with that. But you should look at what's actually in them. What are you giving up or trading with that? And then let's even question and you hit it right on the head. You said now mom doesn't have to spend time with baby. Well, great. That's a selling point to a lot of people. But as a society, are we really better for that? I've grown up in places, and I've lived in places especially like the South Pacific or parts of the Middle East, where I've spent a lot of time just seeing how moms interact with their babies in such beautiful, natural ways. And why are we so in a rush and pressuring mom to get back to the workforce and start producing again, right after birth and delivery? Is there anything really in her life that will be worth spending those moments with that newborn? She'll never get that time back. And I think in a perfect society and in an ideal world, we would celebrate motherhood and the postpartum phase much more than we do, rather than how it's handled right now in our present specific society.
I completely agree as a father.
Yeah.
And as a, my ex and I were married for the first 3 years of our son's life. And I think they say, and I think they're right, I think it's the first 5 or the first 6 years are the most important. Maybe it's 5.
Hugely formative.
I mean, they're all important.
Absolutely. No,
the time you spend with your kid.
I get you.
But as far as development goes, and we were very conscious of that. She breastfed, not the whole time. I mean, the first 2 months, solid. Yeah. After that, we did go to formula. Mm-hmm. But, I think there's a bonding there. And I think, and it's, again, going back to the metaphysical, there's probably things going on there that we can't quantify or that we can't observe, but things that are special and things that are effective with children. And that's the foundation. You do a great parenting job for those first 5 years. I think a lot of things after that are a lot easier. And they were in our case. We were very aware of how we were parenting and what we were doing and when we were doing it. Yeah. And I think it's paid off. I mean, my kid's 16 now, and I called him an adult a couple of weeks ago. I said, I know age 18 is what we say is when you're an adult. But, A, you can reproduce.
Yep.
Now. And B, you've got it together. And sure, you don't have wisdom and experience like I do. Yeah. But there's some people my age that are nutcases. So just because you're 16 doesn't mean you're... Anyway, but yeah, that early time with baby is so important.
Just the little bit you told me about your son, I can tell you guys did it right up front, being intentional about that, because the type of person he is at 16 years old, which is just getting started. There's, like you said, there's people that are stuck in perpetual adolescence for the rest of their life. They stop maturing or developing emotionally at around 8 or 9 years old. And then we're just kind of dealing, once you realize that people are kind of stuck at that age for the rest of their life, everything they do makes sense to a certain degree. So
yeah, tell me more about your book. So it's called Starving Babies. Published when?
Published it in late 2022.
Available where?
So Amazon.com or in my office here in Pleasant Grove. I've got 1 million copies around the house in the basement. As self-published authors tend to. But starvingbabies.com is the website where I put podcasts like this one where we're talking about those things. There is a huge community of very well-read, well-to-do, it's very much portrayed as kind of the fringe. If you want to have a natural home birth or a birth center birth, if you do anything other than a C-section in a hospital, you're painted as kind of this fringe, super crunchy mom. Or if you don't want to give formula, or if you do want to breastfeed beyond 2 years or whatever it is, that has been the norm for hundreds of thousands of years, and what we're living with right now is the experiment. It's not the norm. And by any objective measures that you look at, it's not doing what was intended to. It's not the shortcut that we all thought it was. And I think you could say the same a lot for surgical interventions and for different medical protocols in treating, like we mentioned, cancer or depression or anxiety and things like that. That hasn't yielded what we would expect as a society. So Starving Babies, I have the most supportive, my best friend, business partner, he took on a lot of the clinical day-to-day for me to be able to focus on this passion project. And I mean, he bankrolled, with the business. We just decided that this was what we wanted to invest our time and money into. And it was taxing on both of us. It was a lot for me to write. This was before AI and editing and all that stuff is where it is today. But, and I'm talking about 2022, like it was yesteryear,
it was 500 years ago.
Exactly. But, I started looking, okay, why did we have this infant formula shortage? Well, it was a huge breakdown in the biggest manufacturer here in the US, that system has such a single point of failure that if one lab shuts down, if they get a sneeze, then the rest of the infant formula world gets a massive problem. So FDA wasn't doing their job in my experience and evaluation. And it was a massive issue. And then I thought, okay, well, why are we? So I looked at the core cause of that with politics and our supply chain. And then why did that get to be that way? Well, it wasn't by accident. There's very intentional people who want to control a monopoly on that. And until 2022, 23, we had 3 or 4 companies in the US was all that were allowed to make this stuff. And then they opened it up for other, competitors to come into our market from Europe and things like that. And unfortunately, rather than elevating our quality of formula to them, they've let their standards slide down to what Americans are willing to slug down. And so we've had a lot of emphasis lately on, artificial dyes and things like that in our food supply. I'm waiting for the day that everybody looks at our formula and wonders why it's all based on cornstarch and corn syrup and things that we know are going to change forever, the way that little body responds to insulin and hunger cues and healthy metabolism, which starts at that age. We're programming babies when we do it naturally, the way that we always have. If they're constantly with mom, they're used to having that food supply that doesn't create the appetite issues that we see and anxiety around food and things like that as we age. And so building that neurology young in those formative years, teaching them that there's healthy food on demand from mom, creates a bond, yes, with her, but a healthy relationship with food that you can measure in the incidences of juvenile diabetes and things like that.
Wow, I had no idea about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, juvenile diabetes and things like that. I will say I went to great lengths to research everything in the book and share those sources. So I read probably 800 different papers, and about 250 of those were relevant enough that I put them into the book. I wanted to be very research-based. And I've had people in Washington that have asked for this as a citation for some of the legislation and the changes that I'm hoping are going to be made nationally very soon. I worked with people who have a lot to do with our national food supply and our things like that. The reception was amazing for Starving Babies. It was an Amazon bestseller when it was released in about 6 different categories on parenting, infants, nutrition, even our food supply, which I didn't even know there was a category of books that talked about national food supply, but apparently there is.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you. That was
great.
And then I've had opportunities, for conversations like this that I never thought me as a person, a single dude, no kids, chiropractor would be entering this world. But I think when you're passionate about something, and if you can spend some time with yourself, if you can think about these things and you can accumulate, if you study something for this long, if you read 800 pages, papers, I don't know very many world experts who have read as much on this tiny little piece of the human experience that is formula and breastfeeding. But I think if enough people get passionate about little slivers of society and they can move the needle in their respective spheres just a little bit, it'll all be worth it.
Well, I love that you're doing this work. And I hope you don't mind my saying, Dr. Valdez is in his early 40s.
Late 30s.
Late 30s. Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
But you're close.
I was trying to do, because I watched some of your podcasts from the past, and I was trying to do the math. Okay. But I mentioned that because, we talked earlier that the human spirit always wins, and it always comes back. And while you were talking about the formula machine and the advertising and the selling to moms, it sounds scary, and it is scary, I think.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, okay, at what point are we never going to know the past? Are we never going to know that breastfeeding is better? And that just because something is convenient, what's the cost of the convenience? What's the cost to the relationship with your child? What's the cost to your child processing food in his teen years and not getting juvenile diabetes? So I love that you're doing this work, because you're still kind of young.
Not as much as I used
compared to me. But see, it's really interesting that the right thing doesn't go away. It gets quiet.
Yeah.
Other things get in the way of it. But I think this is great. This is great work that you're doing. And honestly, if my ex and I knew as much as you just told me, she probably would have breastfed for more than 2 months. Because I think it was a convenience thing. He slept in our room for the first 2 months. And after that, we moved him to his nursery, which is just right down the hall. But it's at that point that we started the formula. And I don't remember the exact reasoning, but I think it was probably for convenience. And she didn't have to use the breast pump anymore. And
Yeah.
all that. But
And you said it, that it's not the most convenient thing to breastfeed. And this entire discussion has to be framed on an individual basis with so much love and deference to the individual choices that parents make. You're always going to decide what's best for your marriage, for your kid, for, all of your circumstances. And you have to treat former versions of yourself with a lot of grace and forgiveness. We did the best we could with what we knew. And that applies to humanity in general. We'll look back at this era of heavy medical intervention in birth and formula feeding and things like that. We're like, well, we didn't know then what we know now. You look back at how we used to treat tobacco products and, automobile safety or whatever. Like we didn't know what we were there. And humans, thankfully, were always going to push for better and better results. And sometimes that doesn't always mean going ahead with things that are changed and different. Sometimes we realize that this experiment has failed. We need to go back to the way that things used to be. My family motto, my family crest, I'm also Scottish by genetically. And so our crest is Veritas Vincit, which Latin is truth prevails. And I think eventually that is always the case. However you want to look at it, societally, scientifically, it's always going to be there. And we can kind of wander down a path, but we always come back to it.
No, I love that. And again, I think new media is helping that.
Yeah.
Because, and this is again why I have these Brainspace and In the Shadows episodes, is to let people speak who aren't speaking in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, and maybe you could, well, not maybe, I'm sure you can speak to this next, is people who are so locked into the present or the past, and then they hear these new ideas and they're like, oh, you're nuts. Like, what do you know? Formula is the way to go. And you're like, well, and that's what's tough is when, quick analogy. So I stopped watching the news back in 2008. And I wasn't really a news junkie anyway. We were talking about our foundations and how we were raised. I wasn't really, I barely knew any current events, like even through high school and college. A, I didn't hear about it all the time. B, I didn't care. Like I had stuff I was in a couple of rock bands. I had college I was going to. I had girlfriends. Like I got a busy life. I'm not going to, who cares what's going on in outside? So anyway, from 2000 to 2008, that's when I was a news junkie. I don't know what it was. It caught my attention. I followed politics. I watched all the cable news. I watched Fox and CNN because I wanted to find out what they were both saying. And by 2008, I was exhausted. And I was like, I've only been doing this 8 years, but people live like this. But I felt weird at that time because everybody else was, because cable news was still kind of new back then. It's 24 hour. You need to stay informed. Oh, we need to know what's going on. And no, you don't. But it's hard telling people that today, but especially back in 2008. So I think the new media is starting to expose things like the media itself and governments and medicine.
Yeah. So
that's why I love you doing what you're doing. So, which leads me to ask you, what, if any, pushback have you had? Whether it's from the AMA or if it's from parents that you're trying to coach. And I'm sure you know how to handle both because you've probably had some experience. So have you had any pushback on that?
Yeah. And let me just say, it is a scary thing to put your thoughts and beliefs and conclusions like this in black and white print that anybody can pick up and challenge you on. But I think that's how we have these discussions. It's definitely... It's interesting. When it first came out, a lot of my family was very excited about me publishing, not so much about what conclusion I'd come to. And not everybody's going to be ready for it. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I am my own medicine, and so it's led to a little bit of friction and distancing from some of my family members who feel like I am critical or judgmental of the way that they've chosen to parent or begin life for their kids. And nothing could be further from the truth. I assume that everybody's just doing the best they can with what they understand. I did have some pushback from the medical community. I published this, right at the end of the pandemic years, and a lot of my professional network were pediatricians and nutritionists and things in the medical side of looking at this, and they felt like I was critical of their profession in general. And I tried to treat that very carefully in the book of just saying, hey, there are phenomenal nurses, OBGYNs out there that are doing amazing work, and I don't want to diminish that at all. They're not all in the pocket of big pharma and big formula. I made really good friends with a phenomenal OBGYN who's, board certified, just a brilliant human being. He had me on his podcast once actually, and is just an expert in that space. We're seeing more people like him that are waking up to just what we've been talking about. And so the pushback hasn't been all negative. Of all places, Germany and Canada were very interested when the book came out. And I did podcasts in those countries just to promote, the book initially. And then Germany, Switzerland, most of Scandinavia and Northern Europe has already, they know what's in the book. And it's just, they're excited because somebody's affirming it in the research. It's only revolutionary in a society that is so entrenched in now what is our norm. For the last 2-3 generations, we've breastfed or we've formula fed. And so getting back to that and recommending anything different, you're the crazy one. So.
Well, that's really interesting that you've gotten a lot of support elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't even say it's interesting. I'd say it makes sense.
Yeah.
And that the U.S. is probably the place that's given you the biggest pushback.
Right.
And again, bigger picture on this, I wonder, as a new nation, again, in that creative, curious mode that like we left that area because we didn't like a few things. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like we're reinventing the wheel over here, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I've heard, and we were talking about cancer before we started, that I read a book by a doctor who was a cancer doctor in Germany. And he said a lot of the same things that, big pharma's in charge and politicians, and you can't get through to them, and it's all about the money, and we don't need to cut people to cure cancer, that there's a lot of holistic methods. He mentioned there's 300 of them, the 300 different ways to cure cancer. And in the book that I read, he listed 30 of them. Like here's some things you can do. And it's just fascinating. And for a guy like me who considers himself at least slightly intelligent, I've never heard of any of this stuff. And again, it's just, we only know what we know, and we only know what we've been taught or what we hear about in culture. But I love that there's alternatives. I'm an alternative guy.
Yeah.
And I think the individual should make their own decisions rather than be forced to by the government or told to by culture.
Yeah. And not knowing about those things, that's by design. That's intentionally. A lot of it is curated by the legacy institutions that are profiting from the status quo. And it's funny because we all joke about like, oh, you're so smart. If you could cure cancer. What if we did? What if we never got it in the first place? And in our mind, what I always thought that meant was somebody has this magic little pill that comes out of a bottle and you take that and your cancer's gone. What if cancer is more indicative of our lifestyle and our cumulative choices as a society, as an individual? And there's a genetic component. So it's our family. It's the trauma and the habits that we've handed down. It's environmental and how we choose to live in a stress polluted world, or choosing this other way. And we also get pushback for that. If you choose a low toxin environment, for your household, you're branded as kind of a crazy, more holier than thou type of, or oh, she's too good to eat fast food. It's like, well, if you knew what she does, you might make the same choice.
Yeah. No, that's right. Okay. Do you want to talk cancer? Or do you want to talk more babies?
No, we're basically on that topic now. We can go down that.
Okay. So I want to talk cancer, and then I want to talk religion.
Cool.
Okay. All right. So I brought a book with me. The audience doesn't know this, but you do, because I showed you. So this is The Only Answer to Cancer by Dr. Leonard Coldwell. And you can see what I did to the book. I basically highlighted the entire thing. because it was explaining things. Oh, and by the way, before I move on, okay, is this guy a quack? I don't know. I'm not well-versed enough in cancer or holistic medicine versus Western science. I don't know. But I will say this. This book was published in 2011. And according to him, at that time, he'd already been in practice for over 30 years curing cancer, mostly in Germany. And that alone made me interested because, again, I kind of have a general idea of what's going on in the U.S., but I have no idea what's going on in other countries. And of course, our mainstream media isn't going to talk about any good news anywhere. It's all about fear and suspicion and hate. That's all the mainstream media is, and that's what a lot of new media is too, unfortunately. But that's because why? Because it sells. What do they say? Our fear instinct is the most base instinct that we have. So if you can trigger our fear instinct, which is hate and suspicion and whatever, of course that's going to be. Anyway, so this guy alleges curing 35,000 people with a 93% cure rate. So of those that saw him, he only lost 7%. How is that proven? No clue. I don't know. But here's what kind of caught my interest. He cites a lot of other doctors, and he cites a lot of other treatments, not just his own. In fact, the very back of the book, maybe the last fifth of the book, is articles written by other people. So are they quacks? Could be. Is it a scam? It's a pretty detailed scam. There's a lot. It's not just one guy saying, here's how I cured cancer. You should too. He cites a lot of people that support him, that have written papers about him, and other people. So anyway, my point is, I think the United States, the Americans, natural instinct, oh, he's a quack. Well, we think he's a quack because this is new. We've never heard this before. And we're convinced, I hate to use the word brainwashed, but we're convinced by the big pharma and the American Cancer Society that this is how you treat it. And then when somebody else comes along and says, don't ever do chemo because it's poison, it might kill your cancer, but it's going to kill the good cells too. And as soon as you get on chemo, you're going to age 15 years. You're going to lose your fingernails and your hair is going to gray. And I don't have any experience in this at all. I'm just saying what the book says. Don't do surgery because if you do, it's going to open up the cancer and that's going to make it spread. Don't do radiation because again, you're going to kill the good cells. So, and the older I get, the more anti-establishment I become. I just listed off all that stuff about a half an hour ago about the institutions, the government, the politicians, the Hollywood and universities. But anyway, it was really interesting. And he lists exactly what to do, and in what order. And I have to admit that if I ever do get cancer, I've kind of got a dilemma because the old me would have said, okay, cancer specialist, cancer surgeon, what do we do? Chemo? Okay, I'm there. But after reading a new idea, which again, I can't say I'm convinced because I'm just not that well educated on the topic. But I have a new idea to consider. So then I talk to other people who may have the same idea, or it sounds like in your case, you have some experience. So after that long diatribe, what is your experience with cancer or cancer patients or other doctors who are cancer, homeopathic cancer specialists?
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I think you summed that up really well. I think, and I ask myself that all the time, am I really going to put my money where my mouth is? If something like this, if a diagnosis like this hit me, what would my first instinct be? First of all, I changed my medical power of attorney, my emergency contact. I want that to be somebody who is exactly on my page with all this stuff because, God forbid something happen. I end up in an OR unconscious for some reason. Somebody has to make that call. I want to make sure that the philosophy that they treat me with is the same one that I would treat myself with. And I never thought how much philosophy enters the discussion when it comes to medicine until I became a chiropractor. And yeah, do you see the body as something that's inherently weak and prone to genetic defect that leads to cancer? Or do you see it as something that's incredibly resilient and adaptable and capable of figuring this out on its own? whichever one you choose, that's going to determine, oh yeah, I need more poison to kill the cancer, or I'm just going to go back to what was working when my body was healthy. And that was eating clean. That was,
Getting rest.
Exactly.
Drinking a lot of water.
Yeah.
Low stress.
And if that happened, I'd probably be inclined to actually exit the United States because of all the radiation and the pollutants and things that we have here. There's places in the world where people are doing far better health-wise than we are. And that's the type of diet and water and environment that I want to find myself in if I need to heal. And so a diagnosis like that changes all of your priorities. Suddenly your 9-to-5 job, your access to a cell phone, all of those things kind of are less important than getting healthy again. And, we study radiation from all of our devices and what's in our food and those things. I haven't read that book. It's definitely on my list now since you mentioned it, but I can't respond to his specific approach to that. But there are hundreds of protocols like that. I have some of those. Now, I don't treat cancer in my profession, but I'm always looking for oncologists who are thinking like this, who have that philosophy that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating organism.
Now, what's an oncologist? Is that a cancer
that's
specialist?
That's a cancer specialist.
Okay.
Yeah. Somebody who studies cancer and the treatment of cancer. Our national predilection to treat that is to hit it with some of the worst toxins and more radiation or cut things out. And that is not, again, that's the experiment that we're in rather than the norm. And people didn't die of the types of cancers that we see, and certainly childhood cancers, which is something that I see in my profession in pediatric chiropractic. Those things were not as prevalent, and we have to ask ourselves, why are we now dealing with that? From a chiropractic standpoint, cancer is growth of the body that is not checked by the nervous system of the body. It's replication of cells without the permission of the innate intelligence of the body. And that can manifest in lots of different ways. If it happens in the blood, we call it leukemia. If it happens in smooth tissue, we call it a myoma. There's all these different names for cancer, as if naming it is going to help it be better. But really what we need to do is focus on getting back to what works and ultimately, what gives our body the best capability of targeting those cells and eliminating those. So one of my biggest mentors, my best friend back in chiropractic school, he's a generation ahead of me, so naturally we get along with each other, just because I'm an old soul. Exactly. He's my people. So he's probably about 70 now. And when he was my age, he was diagnosed with late stage prostatic cancer. And this is his story to tell, and I don't have all the details of everything there, but that type of a diagnosis, he went to an oncologist with this, and that night he went to a chiropractic seminar where they were teaching, different adjusting techniques, and he was learning from one of the best at that time. These guys were legends back in the 80s, 90s. And he called my friend up, in front of 100 doctors or whatever, and was doing some diagnostic tests, and he was doing one that was specifically checking for maybe that cancer that he just found out that he had. And the seminar guy turned off his microphone. He leaned in and he says, "Son, I don't know how to tell you this, but you've got late stage prostatic cancer. You really need to see somebody immediately." And he's like, "I did today and I have the diagnosis, but thanks for confirming that, So turns his mic back on. He goes about his thing. But I thought that's so incredible that after all that he paid for to go through the Western medical process, this person that was so in tune with their technique came to the same conclusion. So the truth was always there. It just took two different routes to get there. And my friend, he sold his practice. He simplified his life in a major way. And he moved to, of all places, Germany, and began a treatment regimen there that was it was quackery in those days from the American medical definition of that. Mm-hmm. And most cancer patients, they don't actually die from the cancer. They die of starvation.
And they die from the treatment.
Yeah, from the treatment. And the cancer eats the food and the energy supply that is intended for our body. And so the first thing they wanted to do was restore his appetite. And they used a form of medical marijuana that was not psychoactive necessarily, but they would burn it in this room, and the CBD, combination would trigger his appetite to continue to eat. And so that was one of their first, focuses. And then using the brain to treat that is also a very untapped thing. We call it a nocebo or a placebo effect here, of just like, oh, well, you thought that, and then it became that. Well, that's still an effect. Like that should capture our attention and our curiosity, I think, nationally, rather than just being something we're trying to eliminate from our clinical trials. Let's lean into that. Let's steer into that. And you look at, people like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who are all about unlocking the power of the brain to treat things like that. I get a front row seat to those types of miracles in my profession, because I'm just connecting the brain with the body. And then some of the craziest, coolest things happen when that happens. So in my friend's case, his oncologist, his doctor came in and told him, you have 13 sites where this cancer has spread throughout your body. It's late stage, if it's a stage 4 is metastatic. It's spread throughout the body and things are growing on their own now. And Western medicine would say, well, let's radiate everything and kill everything and take it all out. What his doctor there in Germany said was, I went every day for 5 minutes a day, and just very intensive 5 minutes. And it's hard to think about one thing for 5 minutes, especially if you're like me. But his doctor said, I want you to imagine going through your body and taking these tumors out. Imagine what they feel like. Are they slippery? Are they cold, and smelling them and maybe tasting and seeing what, just visualize that so much. Give it a color, give it a personality, a name if you want to, whatever it is, and do that throughout these sites in your body every single day for 5 minutes a day. And he did this for about 6 months, and he finally asked his doc, he's like, what's the point of this? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? His doctor's like, well, you'll know when it happens. And one day he went to do that, and he couldn't think of what that tumor was like. He couldn't visualize that. He couldn't call it up to memory anymore. And he told his doc, he says, this just happened. Doctor said, okay, great. Let's go do some scans and see where you're at. Cancer-free. And he has been since then. I mentioned he just had his 70th birthday. Now he does take some great supplements that I believe in, and he introduced me to those when we were practicing together. And to this day, I still take those just as a preventative measure, because if it worked for him and it's kept him that young and healthy, he does 300 push-ups every day before he gets out of bed. Like he is the person that I want to be when I'm that age. And so there's a lot out there, and we don't have to just have one pill or one treatment that is approved by the American Cancer Society, whatever it is. There's a lot of things, and new media is bringing those alternatives to light. But alternative, if something is alternative, it just means that's what we used to do before we changed to the status quo.
That's a great point. Maybe we need a new term.
Yeah.
Or we could call it the old way or the proven way or the best way.
Exactly. Like
instead of alternative. Alternative sounds like we just made it up on the spot, but it's like it's been around for however long.
Yeah. And there are a lot of buzzwords like that: alternative, holistic, wellness. These are keywords that, I've been working on our website for our practice this week. And so I'm very much aware of what language are we using online to discuss what we're doing, because there's certain things that will get you flagged and shut down by the FDA. If you're saying you cure things or treat things and that's out of your scope, that's a problem. So words like alternative, there's wellness is such a throwaway term now. If it's a wellness visit at a medical pediatric office, they're just going to push a bunch of, things at your kid that you may or may not need. I liked what you said though before about how the truth is always going to eventually win out. And to follow that up too, I think the fear of future loss or future pain is a huge motivator. And so I've become, just in the last few weeks, I've been kind of reminded, I've had enough experiences in my day-to-day life that remind me that any person who is pushing fear, guilt, anxiety, as a means to coerce you to do something, they've got something to sell. They have a higher motive there. There's so many, especially in my profession and just in health in general, people who use these scare care tactics of, oh, this could happen to you if this is untreated and whatnot. I think the same applies to going toxin free or living healthy. If you're so afraid of a diagnosis like that, of the toxins that we're in contact with daily, you fixate on that. That's where most of the energy from your brain goes. Where attention goes, the energy flows. And so if your intention is to live a health-free or a toxin-free, healthy life, that's great. But if you're so scared of toxins, that's also telling your body that these are so bad that it's going to wreck your gut, wreck your health. You can tolerate a little bit of the bad and still be okay. And so framing your mindset towards those things that scare us, I had measles once when I was in grad school. As near as I can tell, that's when it was. I had blood work before that, no titers, and then this horrible sore throat, flu type symptoms for about a week. And then after that, my titers are through the roof for measles. And it was a wild strain. I probably contracted in the third world. But after that, my fear of a disease like the measles, nil. My likelihood of developing late stage cancer later on in my life, down 45%, I think, for measles survivors. So there's always a trade-off. And if we can reframe the fear that we have around health, if we really understand the risks that we're up against, we have a more positive, adaptable outlook towards that. And I think that's a healthier way to live.
Yeah, and I love the story of your buddy, the cancer survivor, just doing it through 5 minutes of focused brain activity. And you're right. We underestimate ourselves. We're always looking to other people to help us out.
Yeah.
Not just in medicine, but other things, other things in the world. Yeah. Well, I can't do this on my own, so I need someone to fix it. Well, sit down a minute and just work through it a little bit. Get educated. You know what you know. You don't know what you don't know yet. So there's other things to look at. And we don't give the power of our own mind or spirit, let's say, maybe, enough credit.
Yeah.
A few more things I found interesting with the little bit of cancer research I did after saying, hey, there's alternatives. There's that word again, to Western medicine. One is that every human being has cancer throughout their lives, at least 6 times. And the reason why we don't get it is because our immune system takes care of it. I was like, well, that's interesting. I never heard that one before. Another one is if left untreated, and again, I'm not giving medical advice, right? I'm just telling you what I've learned and encourage people to do their own research and make their own decisions. But that many cancers, oh, by the way, I think you alluded to it. I don't know if you said it exactly, but cancer is cancer. So if it's pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer, lymphoma, melanoma, mucosa, there's all these different words for cancer, but it's all the exact same thing. It's just in different places in the body.
Right.
But that many cancers, or the one cancer, if left untreated, often doesn't kill you. Like you said, that, and I learned this in my research too, that it's not the cancer that kills us. It's trying to treat it and destroying our bodies in the process. Again, not saying don't do chemo, don't do radiation. I'm just saying this is what I've learned. But it's just fascinating. And again, I consider myself fairly intelligent and kind of in the know with quite a few things. But then you learn about these things that you've been taught for decades may or may not be accurate. And I don't know. It's just, and I don't know why I'm stuck on the cancer thing. I think it's because a friend recommended that book, and it took me like 2 years before I finally got around to reading it. Yeah. And it's one of those books where you're like, man, I should have read this right away. It's interesting. But I've been in prevention mode for probably 5 or 7 years. I'm young enough to have a hopeful view of the future, and I haven't had any major health issues. I've had no long-term health issues. But I'm also sort of maybe at that point in my life where I need to probably pay attention to how I'm living and what I'm eating and how much stress I'm allowing in my life. So that's how I got on the cancer thing, because heart disease doesn't scare me. I think that's supposedly the number one killer is heart disease.
I think you're right.
And I think it's number one. And I think what I remember is that it kills more people than 2 through 10 combined. And I'm not sure where cancer falls. I think cancer's number 4 or something. But cancer to me seems like the scariest because it's got that stigma.
Yeah.
It's a death sentence.
Yeah.
You did something wrong. Something's wrong with your genetics. Something's wrong with your diet. This is your fault. And I'm like, ugh. Yeah. Anyway, but
do you know what number 3 cause of death is, incidentally? No. Iatrogenic. So, which is a fancy word for saying the doctor killed a person. It was a treatment that we did.
Gotcha.
And so I don't know how they calculate those statistics, but yeah.
Interesting.
It's kind of interesting that the thing that we're trying to, the shortcut is what's taking us
Is what's
out.
killing
Number
us.
3.
The people that are trying to help.
Yeah. And, whether it's cancer, in my condition, my heart disease runs in my family because not very many people run in my family. But those are genetic, programmers that I feel like we're told, oh, you have a family history of heart disease, of cancer, of whatever it is. And that becomes a story we tell ourselves in the back of our head. And
What
then
you focus on expands.
you hit our age and it's like, okay, I need to start thinking about getting myself in shape for this gradual, inevitable decline everybody says is going to happen. And I'm even pushing back against that assumption right now. But when we mapped the human genome in the 90s, we thought that we had the whole secret to, all of this stuff figured out because we understood DNA. We knew what all those things coded for in the 90s. What we've discovered since then is that only it takes about 100,000 proteins, different protein folds to run our body, to replace cells, to create, structures in our body. About 100,000 of those have to be told how to form. DNA, the human genome, accounts for about 25,000 of those proteins. So that's a quarter of all the proteins that we need. So where does those 75% come from? It's stuff that happens between the cells interacting in our body and their environment. So it's what we call epigenetics. And so 25% of the genetic cards that you're playing, yes, they come from your parents, your grandparents, and your family history. But that means that 3/4 of your health is in your hands. And these are things that you can exploit. And if you're talking to an oncologist who went through school and residency during the 90s, they're looking at genetics. And they're just telling you, oh, you have this marker for breast cancer, whatever, you really ought to think about this.
Really, it's a 25% chance, if that.
It is.
That's on the high side, maybe.
Yeah. And 75% of those are things that you're choosing to do every day. A lot of that, as we're researching epigenetics, cells have to have a constant supply of energy and of feedback from our nervous system, right? The second you cut off nerve impulse to a cell, it dies. And so what message are you sending that cell? Is it positivity? Is it safe? Is it assurance and things like that? If you can take out your cancer tumors and visualize those, you're telling your cells that that's where the problem is and that it starts to take care of it. If you live in this state of fear about health, issues or toxins or whatever it is, you're programming your body to live in fear, and you can't be in protection and growth mode at the same time. And so I read books like that. For me, heart disease is something that is concerning in my family. And so those are the types of books I gravitate to if I am going to, go down that path. Dr. Jack Wolfson is a long-term mentor of mine. He wrote The Paleocardiologist. He's a board certified cardiologist. He's a DO. And he's nailed down the diet and some supplements that really help with things like that. Again, we're not giving medical advice, but look into that. Talk about that with your cardiologist if that's something that is concerning to you. But these people are almost without, exception, branded as quacks and outsiders to the status quo because they threaten things. If you can teach people not to live in fear and to really take accountability for themselves. I don't know if you follow much about like the law of attraction, the secret,
sure.
Things like that.
Oh yeah.
That for me is kind of the end all be all with that. It's just realizing that we are far more powerful than what we've been led to believe. And our mentality has a lot to do with the things that we attract into our life, with how we manifest health in our bodies. And so I'm a huge advocate for getting the brain space right, getting these ideas set first, then go out and do your research. Once your philosophy is established in here, decide what you believe about this, go out and find the research that will support you on finding those answers or in preventing things down the road. I think that's the best way to go about it.
I completely agree. And this could start to segue into our religious discussion.
Yeah.
I believe, and I got a couple more things to say about cancer first too, but I believe we're godlike. I believe in a creator. And I don't know how or why, like exactly it happened, but I have no doubt that we have a piece of God, let's say, or a piece of our creator in us. I think that's our intuition. Religious people call it the Holy Spirit. But there's no denying that we just get feelings sometimes about each other or about decisions that we're trying to make. And most of us, a lot of us can tap into that intuition more than other people. Mm-hmm. But that's probably when you said, what's your philosophy? right? Are you in control of your life, or is something else? And I just think it's really interesting that we probably do create our destiny more than we think we do, for better or worse. And that's where the law of attraction comes in, that when whatever you think about expands. If you think you're sick, or you're going to make yourself sick. If you think you're going to get cancer at 60 because all the family you've had died at cancer at 60, you're going to get it. Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about that a lot. Talks about, how we forward think. And he even went so far as saying you could just eat the absolute worst diet of all time. And if you don't think it's bad for you, it's not going to hurt you. But if you're focused on toxins, then anything you eat has toxins in it, I guess, unless you're living off the Valdez farm from back in the day.
Right.
But I just think you're right. And again, I think a lot more people are moving toward that. And whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, that was nutty thinking, self-improvement's nutty, but.
Oh, just 6 years ago for me, my health journey didn't start until much, much later. The last time I chose to take any kind of a drug was in 2011. And I was on broad spectrum antibiotics. I was traveling a lot in the third world, and I just thought, my doctor at the time was just like, why don't you just take all this stuff to kill out whatever bugs you get from street food or where you're sleeping or whatever. And that was killing my microbiome. And since then, I've been on this progressive health journey of just gradually taking these little steps and figuring out what was working for me. And I'm in a much nuttier, crunchier, healthier state now than I used to be. And I would add to what you were saying that our perception of stress is also a huge indicator. Everybody's telling us stress is the new killer. You can't stress. There's a degree of eustress, they call it, of good stress, that our body has always been ready to adapt to. And, we talked about that generation 100 years ago that they were some of the toughest human beings ever. We are far more resilient than what we're being led to believe. And if you view the stress as your main killer in life and you have a poor relationship with that stress, that's an indicator that you're going to have some heart issues or all the health issues that come from stress. If you view stress as an opportunity to adapt, you take them on, you're like, yes. There's a Bible verse where Joshua says, give me this mountain. And that's kind of been one of my mantras lately, is just, okay, whatever it is, the obstacle is the way. It's this idea that, like, okay, whatever stands in my way becomes the way, because whatever it is that's stopping me from adapting, give that to me and let me take that on. And that can be true with, just minor inconveniences. We were talking about the traffic getting here. Just, if you view that as something that is negatively impacting you, it will. But practicing gratitude and attracting that higher frequency, living, that's what the law of attraction is built on. That's what a lot of people are waking up to. And it's really encouraging to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Just sitting in your car, like, okay, so you're sitting in this car that's got air conditioning. It moves you from point A to point B without you lifting your legs, right. And you're complaining that it's taking you an extra 2 minutes to get to work. It really is. It's all about perspective and gratitude. Gratitude's a big thing. And the older I get, the more I touch into that. I tap into that.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff around me that I'm so thankful for. I'm so lucky that I was born in this country. And no offense to all the other countries. It's just, there's a few of them that I'd be scared to death. Yep.
When I grew up,
for all the alleged ills that we have in America, we got it pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. I was born in this country, and I'm so grateful for that fact. Raised, in Mexico, which was a great place to grow up and be a kid. And it has its struggles too. But I elected to go to places countries that are dangerous, and life there is so much different. Super, super grateful for that.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's do religion.
Okay.
You are complex religiously. Explain.
Yes. So I believe in something called syncretism, which is taking the best parts of things that you have in other practices or schools of thought or philosophies or religions and bringing that into your own life and your own beliefs. We have our religious institutions. We all identify as a certain way religiously. And I think there's a lot more people nowadays that are identifying as agnostic or, atheist or
spiritual.
Whatever adjacent, and I respect that so much because they're challenging the status quo. And there's a thing as big religion, it's a business. And so a lot of people, I think, waking up to the institutions that have been and really asking ourselves if they're serving us long term is a big part of that. So I regularly attend mosque, synagogue, mass. I love participating in religious discussions worldwide. And so when I say complex religiously, I'm conversant in discussions around God.
Because you've had exposure to a lot of them.
Because we lean into those. We lean into those things, and we're told not to talk about religion and politics. Well, guess what? Perfect society doesn't shy away from those types of discussions and leaning into things and acknowledging your own preconceptions, your own programming and ignorances and things like that. It takes some vulnerability and humility to do that. And I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm very passionate about what we call intelligent design. I have done a lot of research into, my particular emphasis is in the evolution of the nervous system and how did this incredible thing come to be. And so you look back 555 million years ago, in my mind, that is the creative engine that drove most of evolution as we have it. I don't believe in the prevailing theory of Darwinism. Neo-Darwinian evolution has so many holes in that theory, but yet it's held up just like our cancer treatments and our chiropractic, stuff. It's like, this is the status quo. If you disagree with Darwin, you're unintelligent, you're uninformed. That is not the case. There are some incredibly smart mathematicians, evolutionary biologists that are saying there is no way that we have as much information in the cell, in the DNA that we do, or in our nervous system coursing through our body every second of every day. That for me is the physical manifestation of that intelligence of God, of that organizing, creating energy. And so, some of my best friends are devout Muslim and were raised agnostic. My girlfriend of many years is from mainland China. And it's funny because when you ask me, that's philosophy. Philosophy for she and I became our code for religion. She would wonder what my philosophy was on this or that. And I realized that she's asking me, what do I believe about this, how this came to be, or what it means for us spiritually, metaphysically. And so that was what kind of led into a lot of those discussions was, philosophically, where do you stand on this? She means religiously, but we just never gave it that name.
Yeah, that's great. A few things on that. You mentioned how complex the nervous system is, and even some of these evolutionists that say there's just no way it could have happened by chance.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the popular buzz phrases these days is it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to believe in a creator or a God, whatever you want to call the entity or thing or it or person that created all of us.
Yeah.
And I subscribe to that too. That's my evidence-based side of things.
Yeah.
I reluctantly call myself a deist, which believes really only in the fact that there has to be a creator because we see creation. We see the nervous system. We see the complexity of the human eye alone. All our veins and the blood, that's just us. And then you got the animal kingdom, and then you got the earth processes. Like the chance of all of that happening by chance to me is just astronomical. And I know the atheists, I'm sure, probably have some great arguments, and I'm not a debater. I don't care if people believe anything different. I've had my journey through religion and not religion and figuring things out on my own, and the deist thing is kind of where I fall. But I mean, there's just too much complexity in the natural world for me to think that it just literally happened by chance. And even if it did happen by chance, where did those molecules come from?
Yeah.
Where did the Big Bang come from? The stuff, the protoplasm in the Big Bang, where'd that come from?
Right.
I mean, things don't just appear out of nowhere.
We don't.
So to believe, and no offense to the atheists, we're all on our different paths. But I mean, for people who don't believe in a creator, again, it doesn't matter to me. I was married to an atheist. Didn't bother me in the least. The reason is we didn't argue about it. She never tried to convince me. I never tried to convince her. We lived in harmony. We had stuff we had in common, like our son.
Yeah.
And we were totally cool. And she's still an atheist to this day. She's been an atheist her whole life.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she's thought a lot about this stuff. It's totally fine. I'm one of those people who just don't care what other people think.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that you think what you want to think, and that's cool. But I think again, just everything is so complex. That's the physical part. And then I already mentioned the intuition. I believe that's part of God, or that's part of the universe, or part of spirit, or whatever, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
Because that's the little voice in our head. You can't explain where that comes from. It's just there.
The fact that it's a voice that we don't identify as self, you're thinking about the voice in my head. It's something other than me. And there's a lot of philosophy out there. And I do resonate with some of that to a point where maybe it's just your brain calculating so much information in the background, and it comes up with a response that you feel is external to self because it happened so innately. You weren't aware of the logical process that got you to that intuition. That happens. I love studying the role of the pineal gland in neurology.
Is that the third eye?
That is the third eye, yeah. And that structure for me, that is the quintessential moment of life beginning, is on the 54th day after conception. That little pineal gland produces the first molecule of DMT. And that's, it's a psychoactive substance that our body creates naturally, but that's what's responsible for the beginning of personality, of dreams, of anything metaphysical. And they've detected higher than average levels of DMT in people who are having religious or spiritual experiences, especially, visions and some of the metaphysical things. Those are phenomena that I'm perfectly comfortable being rooted in the physical, tangible, scientific world. But you tend to look at those experiences through the lens of science. I look at science through the lens of those experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a more enlightened way to live, because science only knows what it knows. Religion is okay with what we don't know and what we, take on faith. I identify as an objectivist. And so I very much believe my own rational, reasonable response to objective reality. I think there are truths that are just independent and permanent and unalterable. But talking to people who are informed about those things and debating, I love, discussing ideas. And I don't take it personally when somebody has a differing idea. It just gives me an opportunity to kind of see things through their lens. But yeah, that innate intelligence, we're not aware of any process in the known universe where order is increasingly organized into something that is functional unless there's an intelligent being behind that. And so, we look at the complexity that is the human life, and you and I as deists would probably say, yes, somebody did this. Now, I'm not going to take the next step and say scientifically that means that this is why this supreme intelligence organized it that way. When you ascribe motives to that, or, theological implications for that, that enters the realm of religion. But as a doctor of chiropractic and one of like 6 people in the world that actually cares where our nervous system came from, I get really passionate about saying that there is an intelligent design that put all this into motion, and let's look for evidence of that, of where this stuff came from.
Yeah, well, and again, as deists, the evidence is right in front of us.
Yeah, we live it.
It's always been there.
We are it.
and on the intelligent design point, it's like you take a book
mm-hmm.
or a painting,
yeah,
and you say, okay, well, how did this come about?
Yeah.
It's a bunch of words. There's paper, there's ink,
right.
Photos.
Yeah.
It's a basic thing.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as complex as the brain.
Yeah.
Or the nervous system.
Or
or
what
the
if
eye.
I tried to convince you now that, a tree fell down and it landed on a squid and the ink shot out and it just, no. And it gave you the cure for cancer. It's like, what are the odds of that happening? Can you think of how much intelligence had to go into something so simple as that? You're right. And if it's just a book, how much more complex are we? We're not aware of any structure in the known universe that is as complex, millimeter by millimeter, as the human nervous system is.
Yeah. And I guess the atheist would say, and again, I'm not bashing the atheist. Sure. Again, everyone's on their own path.
Yep.
They would say, well, the earth has always been here. Humanity's always been here. And that then, and again, not debating, but discussing.
Yeah.
That goes completely contrary to what we know as reality.
Yeah.
Reality says there is a creator, or something gets created by a creator.
Mm-hmm.
So to have something that's always been here, there's no explanation for that. And maybe that's true. Maybe we always have been here, but we can't comprehend that because we haven't seen that on this planet.
Yeah.
We've never observed it. We can't replicate it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's interesting. I love talking about religion and politics.
I do too.
And philosophy.
All the things they tell you that you don't bring up with strangers, like those are my go-to points.
That's what my show's all about.
I love it. I really think that we need to be open to, I'm open to the idea of panspermia, that life came here from another planet somewhere in the cosmos. I have so many of the isms that I'm like, oh, I'm a semi-pelagic soteriologist. I believe this about human salvation and the whole purpose of this journey in life and things like that. And really my profession is an extension of my belief of how our body organizes itself and continues to organize itself. And there's something innately intelligent about how we're put together that makes us want to survive and reproduce and pass on any wisdom that allows us to do those first two things more readily to the next generation of humans. And I love shows like this, concepts that we've been discussing where people are waking up and are anxious to expand their knowledge of ideas, but also how we implement those in our life to be more expansive, I guess, live more in abundance and less in the fear and guilt. Any system that manipulates people through fear and guilt, and religion has a long track record of doing that. Those are systems that I don't think are going to survive in the new world, because we need people who are confident in themselves and are comfortable with their godlike ability to heal diseases, to create another human life, and then to raise that life and do things that are worthwhile, engage in artistic and intellectual pursuits that are really fulfilling on the human scale. Especially moving into kind of a transhumanist agenda with AI and all that stuff. A lot of people are scared about the future. The only professions that are going to matter are the ones that make a difference in the human element. We have smarter computers than doctors that are going to give us diagnoses and prescriptions and things like that. What we don't have are humans who care about what they do and who are engaged in artistic pursuits that are going to make life better on the planet. So.
Well, and I love it. And I think of literally the dozens of things we talked about in the last couple hours. Really, the brain space that it comes down to is we have more power than we think. Every one of us, if we choose to use it.
Right.
We don't have to use it. That's a free society. I'd rather rely on other people. That is totally fine.
Yeah.
But sending messages that says, you're probably smarter than you think you are. You're stronger than you think you are. You're healthier than you think you are.
Right.
And as far as making your life better, whether it's psychological or physical, start with yourself. Learn from other people.
Yeah.
But, you have the ability to make things like that happen.
You do. And I think we're looking for people. I'm hoping my patients come to me because I embody the philosophy that they're looking for and that they've adopted for themselves. I'm not there to scare them into any particular course of care. I'm not there to sell them on this massive care plan that gets them in a contract for thousands of dollars and years of their life to convince them that it's going to prevent future pain. I'm just there saying, hey, you got this. You're more powerful than you believe. All I'm going to do is connect your brain with your body and get out of your way and let you do whatever your body's going to do, or your baby, if that's the case. Great. You're pregnant. You want to have an easy labor delivery. Let's make chiropractic a part of that discussion and that conversation. So we're at Form Fitness and Chiropractic in Pleasant Grove. Website is formfitchiro.com. And I'm always looking for new patients who resonate with the type of ideas and, innate, intelligent led healing structures that we've been talking about on your show today. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, you're welcome. And say the name of your business again.
It's called Form Fitness and Chiropractic.
In Pleasant Grove, Utah.
Pleasant Grove, yep. And Utah Valley, we see a lot of active, busy, moms and dads and kids that just want to take athletic performance to the next level. People like yourself that are more proactively, preventatively, inclined. And then we do a fair share of just your bumps and bruises, your auto injury type, recovery stuff, because we're very good at getting the body back to its ideal functioning state. And I work with an amazing team there. My best friend is my business partner, and he's the other practitioner there. One of the healthiest human beings you'll ever meet in your life. We're just very passionate about what we're undertaking there is shift the conversation around health and recovery to be more faith-based, I guess, if I could say that without the religious connotation of just having confidence in your body's ability to do what it always is meant to do. And I think a lot of that has been something I grew up with, kind of living in an environment, in a community that had to depend on ourselves. But a lot of that were things that I discovered living abroad and through my education, formal education and otherwise. You discover those things that work for you. And then you start questioning the other stuff that you've been handed. And I'm grateful for everything that my parents tried to pass on and teach and give me. You're doing that with your son right now. But there's going to come a time where he's kind of sorting through all the stuff that's in his bag and say, okay, do I want to keep carrying this up the mountain, or am I going to leave this here and say, hey, this served me this far, but I don't have to carry this into the next phase of my life. We can leave behind those structures, institutions, practices, limiting beliefs that don't serve us on the big picture.
Yeah, and I love what you're doing. Your services are for everybody, if they want them. Mm-hmm. But I would imagine even too, and I don't mean to say what your business does without knowing. I would imagine you have consultations with people too. Like you say, hey, come on in for, whether it's paid or free, whatever. Yep. But you say, hey, let's talk about you. Let's see if we can help. Mm-hmm. And tell me what your concerns are. Tell me if you have any health issues, and then you kind of go from there. So absolutely. I think it's I think you do great work. I'm really glad you came in.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Before I let you go, we have to do the speed round. You have to answer as quickly and as succinctly as possible.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
Okay. True or false? Tom Cruise is the greatest stuntman of all time.
True.
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Whole lot of Rosie or whole lot of love?
Love.
Movies at the theater or at home?
Home.
There is a food that you eat that everyone else thinks is disgusting. What is it?
Yerba mate.
And that is?
It's like we're breaking the speed round here, Curt.
It's all right. I asked.
It's a drink in Argentina. It's like a herbal tea, essentially. And everybody in my life hates gross. It. They call it my hay drink because it's like alfalfa, basically.
Okay. What is your favorite salad dressing?
Blue cheese.
Are ghosts real?
Yes.
How do we end war?
Communicate.
Whose insurance is responsible if two people crash into each other on purpose?
Their own.
If you could spend a day with anyone, alive or dead, who would it be?
I'd really like to go to lunch with C.S. Lewis.
This one's kind of long, so bear with me. True or false? The bands, Asia, Europe, and America should get together and record the song Africa.
Is that a question?
True or false?
Oh, yes, true. Australia can come too, I think.
Is there a band called Australia?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay. What is the meaning of life?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it's to love and to express as much gratitude for the time you're given here and leave something that outlasts you.
Game of Thrones or Harry Potter?
I'm a Harry Potter head.
Did OJ do it?
I think so.
Is the earth flat or round?
I'm questioning that more every day. Round.
Every cloud has
a silver lining.
A bird in the hand is
great. Worth two in a bush.
Who is better at running things, free people or politicians?
Free people.
True or false? Money can buy happiness.
True.
Your happiest childhood moment?
There was a lot. We took a road trip when I was in my senior year of high school. That was the best time for me.
Nice. Which Prince song do you like best? 1999, Purple Rain, or Bob George?
Oof. I'm going to go with Purple Rain. That's just how I'm feeling today.
Which is worse, fear or regret?
Regret.
2112 or Xanadu?
I don't even know how the.
You have to pick one.
Xanadu.
Xanadu?
Yeah.
True or false?
These are great, by the way. Keep coming.
True or false? Alcoholism is a disease.
I would say false.
Video games or board games?
Board games?
True or false? We went to the moon.
False.
The Backstreet Boys or the Jerky Boys?
Let's go Backstreet.
Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin or Heartbreaker by Pat Benatar?
Led Zeppelin.
Complete this sentence. I got a fever, and the only prescription is more.
Chiropractic.
Do you have a hankering for a hunk of cheese?
Yes, always.
Did you have fun?
I had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kaleb Valdez. Appreciate it. And your book, again, is Starving Babies, available on Amazon.
That's right.
And thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to all those out there in new media land, thank you for joining us. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe on our videos and the Perfect Society page, the YouTube channel. That helps the algorithms. It tells YouTube to send out the videos as recommendations to other people. So more importantly, share them. Share this video with at least 5 people. We now have merch. I got to bring out the merch. We have stickers, bumper stickers for the car or wherever you want to put them. Mini stickers that make your tablet or laptop look fantastic, or you could just wear it on your forehead.
Flip it around. It was upside down.
It was upside down?
Yep.
Oh, I must have spun it. Oh, that's genius. I must have spun it during the interview.
There you go.
There we go.
Nice.
Pretty slick. And we have the t-shirts. What is the Perfect Society? It's double-sided there, and then the back is everybody'shappy.com. What size do you wear?
Large.
All right, we have a large.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And don't be a pinhead. Like, subscribe, and share. And contact Dr. Valdez if he seems like a good fit for you. And thank you again for joining me. Sayonara, adios. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
See you later. Thanks, Doc. Well, that was fun.
That was great.
Thank you so much. There's more than one way to skin a cat. This old proverb isn't very popular anymore, and for good reason. Because really, skinning a cat, it's cruel, inhumane, and very messy. But the meaning of the proverb is still true today. There's more than one way of doing things. There's more than one way to live our lives. Think of all the decisions that we make and all that are available. There are so many paths we can take, it's inconceivable how many there are. But despite the abundance of information and alternatives available, most people get stuck in a certain way of thinking. Whether it's what we believe about politics, religion, medicine, careers, family, or other people, we not only rarely change our minds, we rarely even listen to different points of view. So, most people have a very myopic view of life. This is why I love my conversation with Dr. Valdez. Hearing new ideas and information, talking about what ifs, and learning about alternatives always lights up my brain. For me, these deep conversations make life and people more interesting. At the end of the day, it's okay if we want to keep to our own ideas and our own tribes. We're free to do that. Every once in a while, though, it's healthy to open our minds to different ideas, to other people's ideas. All we need to do is listen to them. We don't have to follow them or even like them. But when we listen, we light up that space in our brains which at least considers other ways of doing things. This is how we grow, both as individuals and as a society. Growth is good. So is learning that there are other ways to skin a cat. Till next time, take care of yourself and each other.